Today is Tuesday, August 28th, and today we're going to review actually my training. I had a unilateral strength day. I do some gymnastics fundamental development every day, and then my energy system work was lower intensity with an emphasis on training some of the CrossFit open style gymnastics movements as well.
I may not always sing in tune, and sometimes you don't hear me, but you don't have to be near me to know that I'm singing. This is my song, and nothing can make it die. It's been so long, and it's stronger. I know why, and I wonder if you really, really know that as long as I live, I will sing my song. That as long as I live, I will sing my song. That as long as I live, I will sing my song for you.
Okay, I'm going to attempt to drown myself. You can try this at home. You can be just like me.
So if I were going to be watching a video like this and I were watching another coach or another athlete, I'd always want to get context. Why are they doing what they're doing? So I thought it might be valuable for people watching it to kind of understand where I came from a training perspective to get where I am now. And I think it probably is most relevant to just say when I transferred in my mind to being a full-time coach. So after regionals in 2011, I was at a really difficult crossroads to try to dictate what should I do with my training? Should I, have some concrete goals? Should I try to change the way that my body looks? Should I change the way my body performs? Should I get stronger? Should I fix some of the medical issues that came with a bunch of weight cutting when I was a wrestler and combat athlete? What's the path that's gonna keep me most passionate to get in the gym and keep focusing on my training? And it's been kind of a journey where my body's been like 275 pounds and really powerful. I've been down to 200 pounds and doing a bunch of endurance work. I've been focused just on medical stuff. I've been frustrated sometimes because I've given away a lot of the skills that I cultivated in my past. And right now I'm kind of in a phase where I'm really grateful to have a very clear and concrete direction about what I do want to do with my training. I want to set a good model for the culture that I'm trying to build, that being a coach doesn't really give you an excuse to stop trying really hard. I have some specific gymnastics goals, some specific energy system goals, some specific strength goals, and some specific skills that I really want to cultivate, which my structure allows me to do. My business development is really important for me, so I created a very dynamic model that allows me to have days where I don't train and I don't really beat myself up about that. I have days where I have allocated time to train with my training environment, which is cool for me because I spent a really long period of time feeling like my fitness wasn't high enough to be able to compete, and competition is really fun to me. And I think as a lot of coaches get older, they start to develop their businesses, they stop having fun with their training because they're going to their limits and they're not good enough. And I think I fell into that trap of letting my ego take over. So I feel like now I have a really good, solid motivation to test methods out with my body and really get a fundamental understanding of how the human body works through my own training experience, which is really one of the major reasons I got into the fitness industry. So that's kind of my why at this point. I have a varied distribution of goals. I have a community that really inspires me to be better so that I can better help others. I don't really think that you can truly help people unless you can really help yourself. And it took me a long time to get to that stage. So let's walk into the actual training. Because I have a varied distribution of strength goals at the moment, the way I organize it in my head is that I have weightlifting days, powerlifting days, strongman days, gymnastics strength developmental days, and then unilateral strength days. This allows me to have a broad number of goals that still fit within a weekly training structure that allows me to get better at all of the different components of strength. So today was unilateral strength day. I started with a superset of dumbbell bench press and single arm pull-up eccentrics. I took the kind of agonist-antagonist pairing, something I take from bodybuilding, and I did a bunch of bodybuilding style training when I was younger, where you're taking a muscle group on an opposite side of a joint and challenging them as you go back and forth in your superset. So the dumbbell bench press, I think I did sets of 80, 90, and 100-pound dumbbells. The single arm pull-up eccentrics, a single arm pull-up is one of the skills I want to cultivate. My body weight at the moment is about 220 pounds and I'm 5'11", so I know that's a relatively high level skill. I've went through a period of time trying to develop isometric strength single arm, and I've been doing those assisted for 4 weeks, and I figured, well, the camera's on me, so I might as well take a risk and let go and see what happens. There is a fear, I don't know if it's realistic or not, but of bicep rupture, because I know there's a ton of force on that single arm when you're doing a single arm isometric or an eccentric, and I wanted to kind of take the risk and see, like, have I conditioned myself to be able to do this? So I let go in my first couple of sets, and I wasn't able to hold my body line. My body just kind of like opened up and I kind of fell off the ring, and I realized doing that I could just feel the tension in my bicep, not in a bad way like it was going to tear, but just that I didn't have the strength required to do that. So after the first set, I changed those to just doing assisted isometrics, or where I held onto a pull-up bar on the side of me, and then I let go and was holding with 2 or 3 fingers, and I lowered myself as slowly as I could. My biceps are actually already quite sore from that. So I think it was a good stimulus. It allows me to kind of have some progression built into the design from 1 week to the next, and hopefully over a period of however long I can develop the strength that's required for that specific skill. Next, I moved into 2-arm kettlebell overhead walking lunges. I decided to put this into my design because it was tested at the CrossFit Games, and it was tested last year too with the Fibonacci final, but I wasn't really doing that much CrossFit specific training at the time. And in Noah's recap of the games, he talked about how difficult it was to go the entire length of the competitive field with the 53s overhead. And I always like to try to get an understanding of what that feels like. And obviously I'm not doing the deadlifts and the parallel handstand push-ups before, and I didn't do all the tests up to that portion. So I know it's not exactly the same, but I like to just get a gauge on what they're experiencing. So I started out, I haven't really done those. I don't know, I mean, maybe I've done them like 3 or 4 times in my life. It's not really a skill that I've done with kettlebells. I've done it with barbells before, but I didn't know what the transfer would be like. So I did 53s. I did 4 sets of 50 feet. After the 3rd set, I wanted to just try the 70s. I think at this stage in my training career, I'm really just looking for like little challenges, little victories, things to kind of keep me engaged in the quest and like kind of keep my fire burning. So I picked up the 70s. I tried to go the whole 50 feet unbroken. I failed 3 steps before finishing. And it's interesting now at this stage. I think in the past I would have said like, oh, I was soft, I should have been able to mentally be tough enough to get through that. But I literally got down to the bottom of it and the kettlebells just came down. I didn't have the fire or the aggression to push through the rep. And I think I just found my limit. And it's a very interesting, evolution of my own competitive psyche that I was okay with that being my limit for the day. The next superset was elevated dragon pistol and hand over hand sled drag with a rope attached to the sled. So I had, in my first movement, I had a horizontal press and a vertical pull. My second movement was kind of a vertical press by having the dumbbells isometrically held vertically over me. And so putting in the next pulling action would be horizontal pulling, was my hand over hand sled drag. The dragon pistol is basically a pistol where you squat down, and normally if you're squatting down on your left leg, your right leg is sticking straight out. A dragon pistol, you're squatting down, your right leg is swooped behind your left leg and sticking out to the side. This is something I saw from the movement culture, that they do it on a regular basis. I've seen a lot of dancers do this to develop strength in their legs and in their adductors and in their hip flexors. It's always a skill that I almost thought was impossible to be thick and still develop. But instead of just having that defeatist mind state, I've tried to take some things from the movement culture and from different physical genres and incorporate them into my own training. So the elevated dragon pistol, I'm really at the stage where I can do it just on a box. I'm really trying to focus on getting to depth so that my butt is actually below my knee, and then I'm trying to make sure that my off leg that's sticking out is as straight as possible. It's actually, even doing it in that type of a scaled version is almost at my limit. My adductors were cramping as I was doing it, so I moved from that into the hand over hand sled drag. My weight selection for that, again, it's not a movement that I do on a regular basis with that much variance in my training structure and trying to make sure I'm touching everything. I don't really have the data and the metrics that I would have on athletes where I have structured and regimented progressions. So I asked Mike what he puts on the sled, and he said he puts 45s on the sled, so I decided to put a 55 on there just to get, another small little victory in my own training. I think I did 2 sets there, then put a 15 on top of it, so I had 70 pounds, and that drag wasn't too tough. I definitely had some bicep blowing up at that point because my the single arm pull-ups have kind of taken its toll. So that was the end of my strength portion. So that's my unilateral strength work for the day. I think it took me about 30 to 45 minutes to get through my warm-up and get through that portion. And then I moved on into my structured gymnastics fundamentals work. So I'm doing structured gymnastics trainings for a couple of reasons. The first is that when I built the movement course, and the building of that course really from start to finish took almost 3 years. So the research and development, building it the first time, not liking the way that it came out, refilming it, going through, getting it reviewed, and then refilming another half of the course, that period of time was about 3 years. And I thought, if I'm going to really investigate the concept of movement to make sure I put out a good course, I can't just take the things that I feel comfortable with from a movement perspective. I can't just rely on the fact that I have a relatively good understanding of grappling and MMA and the things that are required from a movement perspective to do those skills, or I can't rely on weightlifting. I have to be able to understand this concept at a much more holistic level so that I can take my principles and make sure that they can benefit all of the different physical cultures, because the themes of movement need to be broad enough that they can have their application there. So one of the things that I'd never done in my training history was gymnastics. The only gymnastics that was really required in 2011 in CrossFit was toes to bar, chest to bar, muscle ups on rings, strict handstand push-ups, some handstand walking, and those skills were relatively easy for me to cultivate for whatever reason, just natural gifts or carryover from other sports. I think I learned how to do a muscle up in 2 or 3 days. And because of that, the level of proficiency that I developed in those skills was really low relative to what exists now in the CrossFit market, and then obviously in the gymnastics world. So I thought that would be a great way to explore movement to upgrade my principles. So I hired gymnastics coaches and went through the process of trying to improve my ability and understanding of gymnastics. I also purchased gymnastics bodies courses, and those things are super helpful. But what I found was that the level of volume and the repeated positional cultivation was too much for my body to handle, specifically in my wrist joint. My wrist joint just couldn't take the amount of volume that was required to do some of the hand balancing and some of the drills that were required for false grip development. And as a result of it, I kind of got burned out and overreached with that type of a structure. So I hired a bunch of different coaches and kind of found the same type of theme. It's either I couldn't take the stressors that were required for the sport, or the sport didn't really have protocols that were designed well for people that didn't have some underlying base level gymnastics development at some point in their youth training, or for people who were big. So I decided to kind of take some of the movements and some of the principles and still keep the same training goals, largely from the fundamentals from Gymnastics Body's program, mana, side lever development, utilize a lot of their movements that I probably wouldn't have been exposed to in my background because I didn't grow up in a gymnastics facility and I didn't do gymnastics. And I wanted to see from an experimental perspective, if I developed the fundamentals, if I went back and I started at the basics and I started working those basics every single day, how much carryover would that have for my athletes that want to do 100 chest to bars for time? Because you hear experts say, well, you should do that, citing somebody that came from a gymnastics background, came into the sport, and then excels at that skill. However, you don't really know how long that developmental process would take. If somebody's 25 years old and they have whatever 5 to 7 years of competitive training left, how much are they going to regress in their 100 chest to bars for time by spending less time doing chest to bars and more time doing fundamentals? So I always feel the best place to experiment with that type of stuff to get answers is with my own body. So that's kind of why I have in my training, and have for a couple years now, dedicated a large portion of my training time to the developmental gymnastics skills. So my first series of gymnastics movements was 5 different movements. It was under grip, so under grip meaning supinated grip on the stall bar, leg lifts, an L-sit hold, a straddle L hold, shoulder extension pulls on the stall bar, and then an elevated reverse plank with compression. I've found personally, and I think this is, I don't know if I would have a physiological or a scientific reasoning for being able to pair these movements together specifically and why they're laid out that way, but what I found is if I take the same movement and I do the movement, take a short rest, do the movement, take a short rest, do the movement, take a short rest, and repeat that cycle on the same movement, the level of fatigue that I get in that specific area becomes overwhelming and negatively impacts the rest of my training. However, if I do, say, an L-sit, and then I move through 4 or 5 different movements, by the time I get back to the L-sit, even though I've still challenged my core, because I did leg lifts, I did mana compression work, I did straddle L holds, but the actual specific pattern of an L-sit had about 5 to 10 minutes of rest between it by the time I returned back to the cycle. I found for myself, this is kind of like a hack to handle a little bit more gymnastics volume. And that's been the hardest thing for me at my body size, is being able to handle the amount of volume. So the way that this structure is set up specifically for what my psychological, physiological, and intellectual limitations are when it comes to being able to develop the skill of gymnastics. So I moved through those. At this point in the workout, I think as I was getting through my 3rd set, I really felt the fatigue onset. I started to lose the ability to feel my core musculature. It almost felt like my midline had started to get saggy. Like if you put a barbell on my back, it would just like crunch me because I didn't have the ability to maintain the integrity from my rib cage to my pelvic bowl. So I knew at that point that I'd bitten off a pretty tough session. That was my 5 series rotation. Under grip leg lifts on the stall bars. I rested until I felt like I hit quality positions. 20-second L-sit hold, rest. 15-second straddle L hold, rest. Shoulder extension pull on the stall bar, rest. Then I did elevated reverse plank with, I originally had with single leg alternating leg lifts to work on unilateral compression. A mana is something that I have a bet with some athletes that I'll be able to do at some point. I don't know if I'll be able to do it, but it's just a fun challenge to work towards, and I've learned a lot about my body actually doing it. But I found when I was with one leg trying to compress that the tension in my off leg that was sticking straight out was too high to be able to create the compression. So I made an executive decision on the fly to change that to have both legs in compression and try to compress myself into basically an elevated mana position where the bench was holding my butt up. So I'm still working straight arm strength, still working wrist strength, and then working on that compression strength, which is one of my bigger limitations when it comes to developing gymnastics. Just the thickness of my midsection from years of strength training and football and grappling has definitely made that type of gymnastics skill something difficult. So I try to make sure that I get specific training on it week after week. So we moved on to 4 more gymnastics movements. So I had freestanding handstand push-up eccentrics, bent arm, bent leg planche eccentrics on parallettes, back roll to handstand technical work, and inverted hang on the stall bar. So one of the things that I actually found this from the movement, 2 things, from the movement culture and from CrossFit, is that the development of high-level skills is relatively easy if you isolate your focus to that and you keep yourself fresh. So one of the things I wanted to do in the past was develop better body lines and ability with a handstand. So I would come in every day and just work on a handstand, develop the ability to kick up. I mean, if you gave me a session and you gave me 10 attempts, one of them would be over 30 seconds. Now, I know that skill level is not gymnastics level or as good as a gymnast, but for me, relative to where I came from, where I didn't really have any background in hand balancing or doing that, it was a relatively good progression. What I found though is when I started getting back into doing CrossFit type stuff, when I was fatigued or if my triceps were sore from doing a bench session the day before, my consistency with regards to the application of that movement was really reduced. So I found for myself, to be able to make that skill more fatigue resistant, I have to do skill work of that movement under fatigue, which makes me much less consistent and makes it much more difficult to get quality handstand work in because there's so much inconsistency with regards to how my body's feeling on any given day. So the freestanding handstand push-up, my goal is to get into the handstand, develop as good of a body line as I can, and do the eccentric to full range. On a good day, if I feel good, I'll try to push myself out of it and maintain the handstand. But after one attempt at that, I realized that was not happening today. I don't know if it was from the bench press or the overhead hold or just the overall volume of work I did at that point. My coordination and overall skill level was just deteriorating, and I didn't want to accumulate sloppy reps, so I just made those eccentrics. Get into a handstand, slowly lower myself until my head hit the floor, kick out, and try to repeat that till I accumulate 2 reps in a set. Then I did bent arm planche eccentrics, where I'm getting into a shoulder stand, bending my legs, so my legs are flipped over, and then lowering myself and trying to maintain as much of a horizontal body line as I could, working on kind of that more arched position, and then being able to engage my pecs and push myself down from a planche position. I know it's not as difficult as a planche with both my arms and my legs bent, but it's still quite difficult for me at my body size to get into those positions. Then back roll to handstand. So I started back rolling again, really just a couple months ago. Something that I'd kept forward rolls and judo rolls in my training to get comfortable just rolling on a wrestling mat so that I could go back and still do jujitsu. But one of the things I never really thought about is that I stopped rolling backwards. And it was a very weird experience for me. About 3 or 4 months ago, I went to roll backwards and my brain couldn't coordinate what to do. I hit my head on the mat, I tucked to the side, just something felt wrong about it. So I decided that I was going to relearn that skill. So I started by just going very slowly, getting into pike positions, rolling, putting my hands on the floor, then rolling, putting my hands on the floor, flipping over, rolling with straight arms and kind of rolling with my wrists. And then I kind of wanted to just take the skill farther. So I wanted to be able to roll backwards and get into a handstand. I started that progression 2 weeks ago. And last week I was just rolling, basically getting onto my hands and falling back to my feet. And there was really like no ability to control. During this session, I gave myself 5 to 10 attempts each time I went through the cycle. I think my best was holding a handstand for like somewhere between 2 and 5 seconds. So it's progress. Again, it's one of those little victories for myself. And this just keeps me engaged. I think a lot of people are afraid to fail in their training. I find for myself that the failure is one of the things that motivates me to want to get better, because I don't like putting all the work in and not seeing progress. So it makes me more focused, more determined, more excited to be able to keep putting work in and know like, okay, well, next Tuesday I have an opportunity to do this even better. So when I have a bad session like that, it allows me to just kind of keep focused, put some notes in there, and kind of refocus myself for knowing, okay, this is what's coming next week. And then the inverted hang on the stall bar, that's a side lever progression in the gymnastics bodies model. I found that there was kind of a quantum leap going from some of the progressions where your body's straight up and down and you're doing blocks and twists to kick yourself upside down. I'm much better on one side than the other, but it's actually an extremely good challenge for my body to be able to grip and hang on something upside down. The amount of tension that's required in my midlines, glute, and back to be able to just stay upside down that close. Again, it's risky. It's probably not something that just, you should just jump into. Some people might not even have stall bars at their facility, but that's one of the movements that has really progressed pretty quickly following some of the progressions from gymnastics bodies and integrating them into my own model of movement training, because I don't really follow them as they're written, as they're intended. I kind of mix them into sessions like you're seeing right now. So that is the fourth and final movement of my second series of gymnastic strength. So we covered the unilateral strength and then the 2 blocks of gymnastic strength training that I did for the day. In my current training structure, all of my energy system work goes at the end of my training sessions. There are some people that I've had as mentors in the past that actually recommend, if energy system training is a priority to you, to put it at the front of your sessions or put it after off days. But I found over time that made my skill of, I don't want to say suffering, but being able to maintain my movement quality under fatigue, being able to breathe quickly and rapidly as I was hyperventilating in those later stages of Metcons or time trials. I lost the ability to do that when I wasn't fresh, because I almost had a crutch of thinking, oh, I need to be feeling good to have the ability to endure. So one of the things that I did with my current training structure, and I don't do this with everyone, my training at this point is all blocked off that I only have a 2-hour window every day to be in the gym, and I get all of my priorities into that, other than the movement work that I do at home or in my office. That's my only training block. So I figured, okay, well, if I'm gonna do that, I wanna make sure that I'm doing my energy system work in as much fatigue as possible. So A, if I do taper myself for a competition, I'll feel more fresh because I'm going to remove that veil of fatigue, and B, because psychologically at the moment in my current training block, I want the experience of having to push myself to my limits while I'm tired, why my body is hot, when my nervous system's a little bit taxed from all the strength work, while my midline is tired from doing a bunch of midline work. So my energy system work almost always falls at the end of my training sessions. The only exceptions being Sundays is a run specific day, and that whole day is really dedicated to energy system development with running. So that one, there's no strength and everything else that precedes it. So the day prior, Monday, I did hard energy system work. My energy system work for Tuesday, which is this session, is lower intensity. I did 3 intervals back to back consecutively, where I started with rowing at a low effort, then did a 50-foot handstand walk, then a salt bike at a low effort, 12 ring dips, then ski erg for 2 minutes at a low effort, and then 8 kipping handstand push-ups. When I wrote the session, which again, like sessions intentions versus what actually happens in reality are not always the same. When I wrote the session, my goal was to find the maximum pace I could hold on each one of the machines that I could still recover from, so that where I wasn't increasing, escalating my heart rate, my respiration rate, my panic, my worry, I wasn't getting more fatigued. And my goal was to hold that pace, then immediately get off the machine and push the pace of the CrossFit specific gymnastics work, because I want the ability to be under fatigue and not have those hesitating moments. So I started out rowing. My first interval, I thought, okay, I want to keep a stroke rate between 25 and 28 strokes per minute, keep it around 1,100 cals per hour. I did that. It felt relatively easy. I kicked up the handstand walk. I fell after like 5 feet, which is pretty atypical. I'm relatively good on my hands doing handstand walking if it's just linear and it's not like paired with an obstacle course or something really complex. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm more tired than I thought. So kind of laughed, went back to the beginning, went to walk, and then almost ate shit at the end of that 25-foot segment on my way just to finish the 25 before I turned around. And that was kind of just the moment where I realized, like, all right, I could dig myself in a hole at this point in my training. So what I'm going to try to do is just lower the overall pace of all of this energy system work, just build some volume on the machines, and then just accumulate the CrossFit specific gymnastics reps that I want to accumulate, because I haven't done kipping handstand push-ups really ever. In 2011, the demand to learn kipping handstand push-ups wasn't really high. A lot of people were just doing them strict. The skill hadn't really been evolved. There weren't people teaching the technique. I didn't really think I needed to, because I could do so many strict reps pretty well. And then after competing, I just never cultivated the skill. So it's only been about 6 months where I've been playing with it, and I have it as a secondary training goal to all of the other gymnastic skills I have. So getting some practice with kipping handstand push-ups, getting back on the rings and doing some ring dips, doing some handstand walks, doing those under fatigue was really the goal at that point. Everything else just kind of became volume. So I just kind of moved through that session just more as a check this box and feel accomplished that I finished the session that I wrote. But I probably could have made an adjustment there, taken a break, cooled off. I did change my clothes and get a drink because I was sweaty and tired before I started that, but I just didn't really have the mental and physical energy that would be required to really hammer that part of the session. So it just became volume accumulation at that point, and wasn't what I intended. But I thought that'd just be a good thing to put up there, that happens all the time. That happens with my own training. That happens with athlete training. I think it's one of the huge values of having athletes in person is that you write a session, you think, okay, well, this is appropriate relative to the volume that they've done, relative to their skill level. Their competitors handle this level of volume. So I'm going to write this nice training block and it looks perfect in theory. And then what actually happens when somebody's in their training session is that you have to make an adaptation. You have to change the stimulus. It's not a competition. I have nothing to prove out there when I'm training. I'm just trying to get better and utilize that time to make me more confident and more bought into my own training structure so that I can stay consistent for long periods of time as the chaos plays out in my life. So I thought that adjustment would be something that would be valuable to share from a coaching perspective. So A, coaches can feel comfortable knowing that just something that happens, and B, athletes know how I would make that same adjustment for myself that I would for an athlete when I tell them, hey, shut it down, or get something out of this session, even if it's not as perfect as we want it to be, because training's always a work in progress. You're always trying to get the right fit, and I think it is the journey to find that is exciting for people. I don't normally talk about my training much in the past. I've definitely gotten a lot of questions and a lot of comments, but I kind of just always thought it was not really that important. I'll highlight the athletes, and then over time thought, oh, I might actually be able to share some things that would be beneficial to coaches who are trying to balance coaching and training, people who are getting into the later stages of their 20s and early 30s and thinking about their bodies changing and their psyches changing from athlete to professional business owner, entrepreneur, setting standards for your own physical development. So this was kind of my first attempt at putting some of my thoughts out there with regards to how I approach my own body. If you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them if you put them in the comments, or if you want to see other videos over time that are more specific about what I'm doing from a training perspective. I'd love to just have some feedback so I know from a guidance perspective what would make sense to actually show. I talked about training my movement, and we have 6 specific playlists that are all tied to movement tools from our movement course that we created for free for all of our YouTube followers. They're broken down into joint rotations, loaded stretching, ground-based movement, locomotion and flow, movement variation, and breathing. The first video of each one of those playlists kind of gives you a broad overview of what that training category should do for you. Like, why should you use it? Why might it be helpful for specific goals? And it can just give you some guidance. And then the rest of the playlist is actual demonstrations of the movements to kind of give you a visual understanding of some of the conceptual stuff that was in that first video. So check that out if you want to understand a little bit more about how I approach movement from a training perspective. And then lastly, this way of thinking about training is really the way that I classify and organize training stimuli for all of my athletes, from Travis to Noah to the team to all of the regional athletes that I've coached in the past, and even professional athletes in other sports. It allows me to have a broken down categorization system to get people better at any of the specific strength and condition implements that might be beneficial for them to be better at their sport. So I'm using this framework to start the construction of our group training program, the design, which we are almost completed with and will be released over the course of the next 6 weeks is our target. If you want some more info on that, go to our website, click on the group coaching tab, put your email in there, and then we'll email you directly as things start to transpire and we're getting ready for our actual release.
Say cheese. No, say cheese.
Cheese.
No, say cheese.
Cheese, I did say cheese. Did you video that?